All right, so I did my project on the oceanic impact of oil dependency. And to start my research, I just found out some general facts. One of the things that caught my eye the most was how much here in America we depend on oil and natural gas for energy. So, um, about, according to studies and research, about 60% of our energy right now comes from petroleum based energy and natural gas. And obviously, as you can tell, that is a huge amount, and we rely heavily on the oil and natural gas industry currently, all around the world, not just in America. So, I, in particular, want to find out how this oil industry that we depend so greatly on affects our world's oceans. Before doing this research project, I had done a little bit of prior research, and I knew from taking environmental issues class that the oil industry was overall super bad for our environment, whether it be through emissions or runoff or just yeah, the things that externalities that come with the means of oil production. So, in terms of the in terms of oil pollution uh, in our oceans, I broke it down to direct pollution and indirect pollution. So, what I mean by direct pollution is things like oil tankers that move our oil around, spilling and breaking and dumping oil directly into the ocean, or and then for indirectly, I meant more like the effect that greenhouse gases has on our atmosphere and the warming of our oceans, and then how that negatively affects our ocean's ecology and wildlife. So that's a more indirect thing, and then oil spills are obviously extremely direct because it's literally just either oil or the waste that they produce going straight into the ocean. So, to jump right into my research, um, obviously the biggest direct impact that oil has on our oceans is through oil spills. And there have been oil spills going on since the 1950s, 1960s, but there have been a couple in history that really stand out and really made the world rethink about our reliance on the oil industry. So, the first big oil spill that I did research on was the Exxon Valdez, which happened off the coast of Alaska in 1989. This one was especially bad for a couple of reasons. First of all, um, the tanker captain admitted to having alcohol before manning the ship, before manning the Exxon Valdez. And through further research, I found that Exxon and its subsidiaries who were running that Alaska route had become pretty lax on regulations. And actually, my research overall uh, told me that. So anyway, or told me that regulations are pretty lax, or they were. They were pretty lenient, and oftentimes these oil companies would rather cut costs by, yeah, cutting corners basically. Um, and then, of course, so the actual disaster. The Exxon Valdez severed a main tank when it hit an ice bar basically, or a sandbar, and due to the Exxon Valdez, it uh, due to the crash, the Exxon Valdez dumped over 11 million gallons of crude oil into the ocean off the Alaska coast, um, and it spread for days without spread for days without the proper cleanup, which was another problem that I found through my research. A lot of these oil companies, because they do not expect the spills to happen, obviously, or were very underprepared. So the ExxonMobil pointed out a few things when it came to ocean pollution. First of all, countless amounts of wildlife was either doused in oil, so they couldn't breathe. There was pictures all over the news of dead animals and um, just like oil-ridden beaches, so pristine wildlife that is now ruined and will take years to clean up, and some of this oil will never come up. So that was the first big oil spill that I studied, and then the second big oil spill that I studied was the Deepwater Horizon spill. So basically, what happened there was off the coast of, in the Gulf of Mexico, on April 20th, 2010, a deep sea oil rig, aptly named Deepwater Horizon, exploded, causing a leak deep in the ocean. Through research, it showed that an estimated 5 million barrels of oil were dumped into the ocean. And the spill continued. The spill continued for countless amounts of days. And then this was another thing that I found really interesting. So in order to clean up the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, they used chemical dispersants, which are also found to be really toxic. So in order to do that, like in order to fix the problem which caused the environmental harm in the first place, they have to add to the toxicity of the ocean by dumping these chemical dispersants in there. And that's found to be extremely toxic, obviously. So it just shows that even though they meant well by doing cleanup, in actuality, the methods that they used were even harming the environment. So that just shows you or tells you about the negative impact of the current system overall. So the second thing that I did in my research was I researched the negative effects on our oceans of oil drilling. Now, oil drilling is probably our most common way of extracting crude oil or natural gas, but there's a lot of negative impacts that go into it. So, first of all, in order to oil drill, they have to mix water, chemicals, sand, in order to break the shale or the rock that the crude oil is hidden under, and a lot of times this is deep in the ocean. So, the biggest thing that I found was the amount of waste that actually goes into the process and goes into the water when talking about oil drilling. So, produced water is the industry term for it, but what it is it's water, or it's actually not water, I'm sorry, it's produced water is a mixture of chemicals, remnants of rocks, and additives using drilling. So these chemicals are like extremely strong, obviously, to remove the shale at the bottom of the ocean, so they're really powerful. And it's been research showed that on average, offshore rigs produced about 480,000 barrels worth of produced water just dumping straight into the ocean every day. So that's, millions and millions of gallons of chemicals and rocks and waste going back into the ocean. And a lot of times these companies do this in order to cut costs. So, um, okay, so I know I know it's not the smoothest, but moving on. The next thing that I studied with my in my research project was oil dumping, which is another cost-cutting practice that is used throughout the oil industry. Um, this is where they basically dump the oil remnants and chemicals and all the waste that they created through doing this right back into the ocean water. So one huge example is the European Edison Oil Company in 2012 was accused of dumping um, was accused of dumping oh yeah 300,000 tons of oil sludge about 40 miles off the coast of Sicily, Italy. Um, and again, this was just due to the fact that they wanted to cut costs, and it's estimated that they saved $93 million. But in the long run, oil dumping is extremely illegal. And obviously, um, the environmental impact is already harsh with oil drilling. So the fact that they were going to just add to that environmental detriment by trying to cut costs and dumping their waste right back into the ocean was obviously shocking. And the more that I looked into this oil dumping, it's pretty common practice because a lot of times the companies would rather save, a couple $1,000,000 than truly care about the environment. A lot of this industry is based off profit, and some of the richest people in the world are part of this industry. So that's become obvious that a lot of times profit is over morality when it comes to this. So, so in conclusion, I think the only way that this is going to change is through much stricter regulations. And I also think that oil execs need to be held accountable because a lot of times these large companies pay fines, but for them this is chump change. And then, of course, on the environmental side of things, I found that oil dumping, oil drilling, and oil spills are the main ways that the oil industry pollutes our oceans, but there's plenty of other ways. And the more that I learned about this, the more that it kind of just made me realize that we really do need to find a renewable source of energy, because if we don't, we're just going to continue to destroy our planet in the name of energy. And also, I would say people need to lower their consumption because America especially, we have an extremely high consumption of natural energy. And yep, so that, obviously, I guess I would just conclude by saying that through research it became obvious that the oil industry has an extremely negative impact on our oceans, and unless stricter regulations come into place, then I don't think it's going to change. All right.